We continue our discussion on the promise of minimum income guarantee for the poorest of poor families made by Rahul Gandhi earlier this evening in Chhattisgarh. Still with us, the former CSO, Pranab Sen, Salman Soz of the Congress and Syed Zafar Islam of the BJP. Dr. Sen, you heard what the former Finance Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, had to say. Of course, the math will be worked out as and when and if at all they form government. But on the back of what you've heard, does it give you more comfort that it is targeted only at the poorest of poor families?
Well, I am a little more comforted, but, it's the identification pattern which matters. So we do have experience in this. When we did the Antyodaya scheme 2 decades back, the way it was done is that a village, the panchayat, was asked to identify 5 families. And that worked brilliantly.
Right.
The targeting was perfect. So, so long as you're keeping it small, you're not threatening the relative order in the community, it works. The problems become a lot more acute when the manner of targeting is done centrally. Then all kinds of aberrations creep in. There is usually elite dominance that comes in, and all of the things that you don't want to happen do happen. So, but as Mr. Chidambaram rightly said, that these are details that will have to get worked out, and things like Manrega, for instance. The reason why it has worked, and whatever critics say, I firmly believe it's made a lot of difference, is because it was self-selecting. And so the targeting methodology is extremely important. Otherwise, you risk, running into social schisms, and that in a country which is already as divided as ours is just a bad idea.
Right. Right. Let me go across to Salman Soz now. Salman, you've heard about the risks, some of which have been articulated by Dr. Sen here on this program, some which I discussed with Mr. Chidambaram. I think as far as especially from a bond and a stock market perspective, I think the single biggest concern will be the fiscal implications of a scheme like this one. And as Mr. Chidambaram pointed out, that the scope and scale is different from what was proposed by the former chief economic advisor. He doesn't believe it's going to be anywhere close to 3 to 4% of GDP, as was the case for the UBI. But nevertheless, given the past experience that the Congress has had with managing the fiscal deficit, this is going to be a concern. How do you address and allay that?
Well, first, even Mr. Chidambaram mentioned this to you. The fiscal deficit did grow, but that was a very special circumstance. We had the greatest crisis in the global economy since the 1929 depression. So if we had to take some fiscal measures, we had to. I mean, the economy was at a precipice. So I don't think that's a fair criticism. I think since then, when we handed over the government to Mr. Modi and the BJP, the fiscal deficit was 4.1% of GDP, 4.5% of GDP. I'm sorry. Now, I personally, looking at data, and I've actually looked at Surjit's data, I don't really think the fiscal impact is going to be that great. And by the way, what we sometimes forget, I think we need to kind of get away from this mentality that fiscal deficit, when you do that ratio, you just look at the numerator. Look at the revenues minus the expenditure. There's also the denominator, the GDP. Right. Imagine when you're putting some purchasing power in the hands of people who will spend it. They're not going to be saving it. They need basic things. They need essentials. They need clothes. They need food. Maybe need school. Need basic health. They will spend it. That is going to go into the economy. That's, so I don't really think, I personally don't think, based on the numbers that I've seen from Surjit and others, that it's going to be a major impact on the fiscal side. But one other thing, again, social protection in India is not at the level where we can even compare ourselves to our Asian neighbors. Forget richer economies in the West. So if we're doing this, this is totally necessary. We must do it. We we must target it. And I agree, there are concerns. Dr. Sen raises genuine concerns about targeting, but he himself says that we have had success with some schemes in the past.
Yeah.
We should try and emulate those schemes. We should try to figure out what works and discard what doesn't work. One final point, Zafar Bhai kind of criticizes us for copying and borrowing ideas and all that. Nobody owns knowledge. Knowledge is free. We should take what is available, what are the best ideas. And by the way, this is not even Surjit Bhalla's idea. These ideas have been in discussion for a long time.
Yes.
We are only going to adapt.
No, but he said that. It goes back to the Bhagwati and the Sen battle. Yes. Now, very quickly, since you've been looking at the numbers, Salman, and I would imagine that there may have been some conversation around this, which included you as well, before the Congress made this promise. What would be a fair number?
No. No, I mean, look, I mean, I don't really want to get into what would be a fair monthly minimum income, because that is something that we will disclose over time. But what I can say is that as far as what the total cost of this program would be as a share of the GDP, it is nowhere close to what even the economic survey said, in earlier years. It's nowhere close to that. It can't be anywhere close to that, because that would not be prudent. So we are going to be fiscally prudent as well. At the same time, I really think that the denominator, the GDP, the economic output, economic activity, that's going to grow. And I think that's going to be a good thing.
All right. So the Congress promising fiscal prudence along with a minimum income guarantee. Zafar Islam, I'll give you the final say before we close the program. Putting pressure now on the BJP, perhaps a lost opportunity, because they certainly have the first mover advantage, at least when it comes to promises being made on this specific issue.
See, they are not part of the government. It's a hollow promise. But let me tell you one thing which I heard what Salman says and what even Mr. Chidambaram said about the fiscal prudence, what they had followed during UPA 1 and UPA 2. Everyone knows that fiscal deficit was in 6 handle. They said the sharply came off, and it had come off sharply, but it was again in the 4 handle and 5 handle, and we had to bring it down to 3.3 level today. And we have maintained all along the fiscal prudence, and you see all the macroeconomic parameters. Today, the Congress is not overly concerned about the inflation. That's why he's talking recklessly about Mr. Salman about that hand in the hands of the people, that comes in the hands of the people. I mean, you have to also be considerate about the inflation level. In their time, it was in double digit. Now the economy is in sound footing purely because the measures which has been taken by the government in the last 5 years has put the economy in order. Every macroeconomic parameter looks very sound, and it was looking terrible during UPA 2 time. And now these people are making the statement that only make people nervous. That again, it is going to be the same kind of macroeconomic numbers with higher fiscal deficit, higher inflation, and inflation. Of course. And of course, the way the bank has been looted by these people, they will continue to do that again in future.
Okay. Okay, Salman, so exactly 10 seconds and I'm closing the program. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the economy is in such great shape that the Prime Minister had to announce reservations for poor people after all this time, because he knows there's distress in this country. There is distress. They've failed. They're incompetent. And that's what they can say whatever they want about us. They wanted to do in 60 months what others had not done in 60 years. If that is the record, then they should just keep quiet and let people vote.
Well, that's also... Well, Salman...
voted out. I think
Salman, that's also...
You have realized only in 5 years that yes...
I'm afraid that's also an indictment. That's also an indictment of your past experience, Salman. So I wouldn't sort of hold that up as a trump card. That's an indictment of your previous and your government's previous performance as well.
I'm not suggesting that. I was merely saying that if the Prime Minister said that the economy is doing so well, if the economy is doing so well, how is it that they're now desperately running around trying to see how they can spend money and throw it at people so that they can get some votes? I think that's the reality.
All right.
That's what they've been trying to do.
Completely out of time. Completely out of time.
10 seconds.
Yeah. Zafar, very quickly.
So, no, I'll just make one statement that, see, it is Mr. Chidambaram who was confirming that the economy is in shape and size today that we can take that decision and it can sustain. It can take care of those expenditure which, when the revenue side can give that comfort today, and the economy lend that comfort to the government that they can take such a decision. In the past, when they were in the government, they were not in a position for 70 years repeatedly were saying they have not done. Now today the poorer section of the society deserve to be given a minimum basic income. Whether in the past they were not deserving, it's just the economy was in bad shape and they were badly running the economy.
Okay, all right. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Zafar Islam, Salman Soz, appreciate you joining us here on the Political Exchange with your arguments for and against the promise being made by Rahul Gandhi in a rally in Chhattisgarh. Minimum income guarantee, an adaptation of Arvind Subramaniam's idea presented in the economic survey of 1617 of a universal basic income, which guaranteed basic income for every Indian, every citizen, but this is only targeting the poorest of poor families.